Hello, my name's Michelle Herzog, and I'm the History Social Science Consultant here at the Los Angeles County Office of Education, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this very special webcast about the College, Career, and Civic Life C3 Framework for Social Studies State Standards and the implications for economics education. A while ago, we produced a webcast that presented an overview of the C3 framework that featured Susan Griffin, Executive Director of the National Council for the Social Studies, and the chief architects, Kathy Swan, S.G. Grant, and John Lee. Now, in this broadcast, we want to take a deeper dive to focus on one of the content areas found in Dimension 2 of the framework, economics. The C3 framework repurposes the teaching of the social studies to prepare students for college, career, and civic life. We're going to begin with a brief overview of the document, and then I'm going to introduce you to two great influential leaders in the economics education community and contributor to the C3 framework, Jim Charkins. Dr. Charkins is a former executive director of the California Council on Economic Education and now serves as the director of the Center for Economics Education at California State University, San Bernardino. At a recent conference for economics teachers, Jim has been described as caring more about economics and economics instruction than anyone else. Dr. Charkins led the passing of mandatory economics instruction at the high school level in the state of California. He developed the MoneyWise Teen program and has been a vigorous advocate for K-12 economics instruction. Jim, we're so glad you're here. Thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thank you, Michelle. I'm delighted to be here.
I also want to introduce you to Brian Held, who's a marvelous teacher at Loyola High School. Brian has been the recipient of the National Council on Economic Education Teacher of the Year Award and the California Council on Economic Education Teacher of the Year Award. Quite an accomplished educator, to be sure. Brian's done some amazing work in teaching economics to students in powerful and innovative ways. So I'm so happy, Brian, that you joined us today for the conversation.
Thank you, Michelle. It's really a privilege and honor to be here. I look forward to the conversation.
So before we get started, let me remind everyone of the basic principles and design of the C3 framework. The work in developing the C3 began in 2010, just as the Common Core state standards were being developed. And a number of us social studies folks were very concerned about some pressing issues. We were concerned about the marginalization of the social studies, particularly coming out of the No Child Left Behind era. We didn't want to see social studies continue to be marginalized. We're always concerned about the motivation of our students. We want them to be engaged and enjoy and really take hold of the wonderful lessons that social studies has to offer. And thirdly, probably most importantly, is we're always concerned about the future of our democracy. We think social studies education needed to be a fundamental part of every student's education. But before the work could go forward, we had to bring the community together because this was a national document we were creating, and we needed them to reach consensus on what to call our subject and how to define it. So many groups came together, and this is what you see. The decision was to call the subject area social studies and frame it in a way as an interdisciplinary exploration of the social sciences and humanities with intention to include civics, history, economics, and geography for that ultimate purpose of developing responsible, informed, and engaged citizens. Very important piece. We had to decide early on who was the audience going to be for this document. First and foremost, it was designed for states to use as a guiding resource to update their own standards, but it can also be, and we've seen this already, a powerful resource for teachers and districts at the local level to make their social studies more engaging, more inquiry-driven, and more practical and relevant to students. The objectives of the framework are basically this. We want to enhance the rigor of social studies disciplines, all of them. Of course, we want to build critical thinking, problem solving, and participatory skills, because you can't be an engaged citizen if you don't have those. And then there was the decision to align it to the Common Core state standards for English language arts. We know a number of states have not fully adopted the Common Core, but many have, and this provides a nice alignment for that, or any state that's interested in promoting high-quality literacy, reading, writing, speaking, and listening lessons. The work began with a number of different organizations. 23 states sent their social studies leads to work on it. A number of professional organizations, writers, teachers. It really was a very collaborative effort. And of course, we brought together all of our national organizations around the various subject areas within the social studies. You'll recognize some of those groups in the slide that you're looking at. So it was important that this be an inclusive, collaborative effort that involved all of our leaders in the social studies, and of course Jim was part of that as well, so that was an excellent thing. A lot of consensus to believe that the ultimate goal for using the C3 framework and the ultimate goal for just teaching the social studies is for students to study all four of those areas: civics, economics, geography, and history, to become active and engaged citizens in the 21st century. So you know you can't reach that through flashcards or memorizing facts and dates. You've got to really engage kids in the study and understanding of deep and complex issues and events in our past and present. So it's built around an inquiry arc. We'll go through that real quickly, and you can learn more, like I said, in the other webcasts. It begins with dimension 1. We want to see lessons begin with a really compelling question, something that's going to grab kids and make them want to be motivated and compelled to learn more. So we invite teachers to create those compelling and supporting questions to launch their unit. And you'll see an example here in economics education pretty soon. From there, you do a deep dive into the content itself. This is not content light. You've got to really get kids into understanding those fundamental principles, foundational skills around those subject areas of civics, economics, history, and geography. From there, you guide kids into dimension 3. And there you want them to gather lots of different perspectives, points of view, really do some of that compare-contrast thinking, and looking and reaching a conclusion about the different perspectives that are very complex, but which they'll be confronted with when they're studying those subjects. And the last dimension, probably the most interesting and exciting, is dimension 4. And that has to do with taking informed action. So, yeah, it's interesting to learn about different periods of time in history and events, but why not apply that to the real world today? When kids study issues around our past, on immigration, on conflicts, on migration, on power dynamics, conflicts, struggles, advancements, those shouldn't just be stories locked in the past. We want to connect the dots and have kids think deeply about those issues in today's world and see what they can do with a good understanding of the complexities to take some action, to do something, to address some of the very challenging issues that they're confronted with today. We want to give them time to flex those civic muscles and develop and practice those competencies to be engaged citizens in the 21st century. So you can see some of the overarching guiding principles. For many teachers, they already teach like this. It's just natural for them because it's just basic good social studies instruction. For other teachers, it might be a little bit of a stretch. And so we introduce this as a great resource to help teachers move in a more engaging, rigorous way of teaching and learning for their students. We want young people to leave our classroom as active and responsible citizens. We want them to be able to identify public problems, analyze them, deliberate with other people about them, and then take some constructive action, reflect on what they've done, and be able to have the competencies and confidence to influence institutions both large and small. It's going to impact how they vote, to serve on juries, to follow news and current events, and to participate in voluntary efforts. We know the study of geography, civics, and economics in these ways contributes to this outcome. And we also know that teaching students to be able to act in these ways as citizens will significantly enhance their ability to be successful in college and career. And so just to let you know, we've got a series of webcasts, as I mentioned, at the Los Angeles County Office of Education website. You can see the URL there on your screen. So we invite you to take advantage of them. They're all available for free. show them to your colleagues, have a department discussion, and see what you can do to try to implement some of these pedagogies and approaches. Now that I've provided a very brief overview of the C3 framework, let's turn our attention to economics. Let's talk about why it's important and how the C3 framework supports high-quality instruction. So at this time, I want to reintroduce my good friend and colleague, Jim Charkins, who is the former Executive Director of the California Council on Economic Education, and now serves, as I said, as the Director of the Center for Economics Education at California State University, San Bernardino. Jim is considered to be a great educational leader in this arena, and like I said, a major contributor to the California History Social Science frameworks, and a major contributor to the C3 framework as well. So Jim, before we begin our discussion of economic education, can you provide us your perspective of the C3 framework as an instructional tool? By working on the document, what were your big takeaways of the C3 for the teaching and learning of economics?
Well, Michelle, I want to say that I really do believe that the C3 framework can bring about an educational revolution. I think we have the tools to change the way our students learn, to make it more relevant, to make it more meaningful, to make it deeper, and these are the reasons why. The first, as I read the document and in working on it, the takeaway is that we're putting the responsibility for education into the hands of the student. We're saying, students, this is your education, and we want you to delve into things so that you make it your own. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a huge thing. The role of the teacher changes fairly dramatically in that the teacher guides student learning and is constantly looking for new ways to help our students learn in terms of resources available, in terms of teaching techniques, in terms of all the things that go into enabling students to learn. We're asking students to look at different sources and to evaluate those sources. That's a huge thing. We've never done that. Well, yeah. I shouldn't say that. I'm sure that many teachers have done that. But as a rule, we haven't asked teachers to say, where'd you get this information and who are those people? Mm-hmm. And we're asking them to do that on both sides of the spectrum. So it's asking students to be skeptics about the things that they see. I think that's very exciting. And then from my perspective, from the perspective of an economics educator, this is the first time that I've seen the 4 social studies disciplines take an equal role in social studies education. I used to tell I still do tell my students, we shouldn't teach economics, we shouldn't teach geography, we shouldn't teach history, and we certainly shouldn't teach civics. We should teach social studies. And that's what this document does.
Yeah, I think you're right. I agree with you. That integration is powerful.
So, what is it that from my perspective, we should be teaching in terms of economics? And first of all, I want to say that there's such a major misperception of what economics is. First of all, it's not balancing a checkbook, which is 5th grade arithmetic. And that doesn't say that finance doesn't play a role in economics education, but it's not some of the simplistic things that people have thought of in the past. Secondly, it's not graphs. So many of the things that scare people away from economics are not at the core of economics education. This is not rocket science. In fact, it's pretty simple. But we've sort of lost that in the way we often teach economics. So what are the things we should be teaching? If we were really going to teach economics well, if students were going to learn economics well, what are the major things they have to take away? The first is that they have to understand that economics is about goals and resources. How are you going to use your resources to effectively achieve your goals? And the most important resource a student has is that student. And so the real focus of the course should be, how are students going to use their most important resource themselves to achieve their goals? But that means they have to have goals. And this is a whole life changer also. A lot of our students don't recognize they have the right to have goals.
Even at young ages, they can start thinking about goals for themselves, right?
Preschool.
Exactly.
Preschool.
So Brian, you're at the high school level. Does this resonate with you, how you introduce it to your students? It's a little different than traditional thinking about economics.
No, well, no, I actually think that is at the core of the message. Economics, educational economics as the discipline is about like looking at the world in a powerful way for as it actually is, and to help students then get the most out of their life. And that certainly requires setting a goal for themselves and then making good decisions in getting there. So, I mean, that really is at the heart of what this is all about.
Which is a different twist than how non-economics teachers would look at it. So tell us some more, Jim, about some of these other principles in economics.
So I think there are two huge boulders. One is benefit cost analysis. And before you shy away from it and say, oh, no, you can't do that, it exemplifies the fact that economics is basic, relatively easy to learn, not rocket science, and prevalent in all the decisions that we make. So benefit cost analysis is huge. Then this is one that a lot of folks don't want to hear. It's the principle of exchange. If I really like your bracelet, and I tell you I want it, and I'd be happy to exchange a piece of candy for it, what would you say?
Well, I'm not sure it's worth a piece of candy.
That's exactly what you do. You say, get lost, Jarkins, right? Wouldn't you?
Depends on the candy.
Well, it's just a little piece of peppermint candy.
Oh, yeah, no, I don't like
No,
peppermint
okay, all
candy.
right. So the point is that you saw this exchange as a lose situation. You weren't going to get more than you gave. And so the principle of exchange says that people will exchange if they expect to gain more than they give. Now, that's not tough stuff, right?
It's in every lunchroom in schools, everywhere. You hear that early on. You remember swapping for your lunch items when you were a kid?
Every day.
Oh, I never did that. It wasn't allowed. But the point is, when you go to fill your tank, and you say, well, not so much now, but in the last few years, you say, gee, that's a lot. I can't do that. But you do it. And you complain about it, but the point is, you wouldn't do it if you didn't gain more than you gave. You got to get to work. You've got to do different things, and this gas is going to allow you to do it. So you gain more than you give, you exchange. You don't gain more than you give, you don't exchange. But the important thing to recognize about that is if you give up your Saturday afternoon to go to lunch with Aunt Tilly, even though you were going to go play or you were going to do whatever you were going to do, you did that because you gained more than you gave.
Well, hopefully so.
Well,
Aunt Tilly will benefit
you
too.
You love Aunt Tilly, and you've made Aunt Tilly happy. Is that not a good exchange?
Sounds like a good exchange.
And so the point is, it's not all about money.
Right.
It's about all of the choices that we make. Then the students need to understand how markets work for a couple of reasons. First of all, if they really understand how markets work, how competitive markets work, and I'm not suggesting that all markets are competitive, but if they really understand that, then they lose the victim attitude. You know, everything is not a ripoff. Markets work this way, and folks produce stuff to earn a profit, and if they don't earn that profit, they're not going to be able to produce it. And then they need to understand labor markets.
That's a complicated one.
It's not complicated, no. If you can provide more to an employer than any of the other applicants for that job, then you're going to get hired. If you can't, you won't. And see, that's part of the point. We want students to understand that they have to have skills to sell in the labor market. And if they can do the things that the employer wants better than anybody else, and if they can give more than they gain, if the employer can gain more than that employer gives. Now, that doesn't suggest that everybody has to work for somebody else. There's a role for the entrepreneur in the economy, and we're probably not going to discuss that a lot today, but there are so many opportunities, but the students have to understand what the rules of the game are. It's hard to play the game and impossible to win if you don't know the rules. Another very important point is distributive effects, and what that means is who gains and who loses. Too often my students ask, well, is open trade good for America? And that's the wrong question. The question is, who benefits from open trade and who loses? and that's a very detailed discussion, but the beautiful thing is that it fits right into the C3 framework. We talk about the role of government, the proper role of government, and that's also an interesting question for C3 because we all feel so strongly about it because we prioritize values differently. And students need to understand that's why we feel so strongly about it and why we differ. Then we go into macroeconomics and they learn about the major macroeconomic indicators, employment, inflation, economic growth, and how changes in those indicators influence their chances of getting a job when they leave school. All of this has to be brought back to them. We talk about income distribution. No democracy can survive without an educated populace. No economy can survive without an educated populace. And so the two, the economy and the polity must be taught together. And then finally, globalization. This is such an emotional issue. Students need to understand, again, that globalization affects different people both in the United States and outside the United States differently. And so to really understand globalization, they have to see how it affects who and where. So those are sort of the biggies.
Well, the way you're describing it, Jim, it makes it very personal. And what I'm hearing you say is young people need to be invested in understanding these concepts, not just for the greater good, but for themselves and how they interact in the world as responsible citizens. Brian, how do these resonate with your students? Young people tend to be very self-oriented. This probably provides them a bigger context.
Well, let me start by just saying, when they come to class at the very, very beginning, they have a little bit of that impression about what economics is, and they all tend to say that they're expecting and hoping to learn about money.
Yeah.
And that's what this is all about. And what they soon discover is it's a lot more powerful than that. And in actually seeing how the world actually works, and I think that's eye-opening for them. They don't realize that when they first come, and then they really see, this is transformative.
Yeah,
for their own lives.
Yeah, and it's not about if you're going to be an accountant or in that business world. For everyone, it sounds like it's something the lessons
apply to
everybody.
Whatever they want to get out of their life,
Exactly.
And they have to figure out the skills and the path necessary to get there.
So let's talk a little bit more about Dimension 1, some compelling questions. What are some examples of compelling questions that you would see in the context of economic education? Jim, can you give us some examples?
I'm going to rattle off some examples. You
Okay.
ready? All right. What human capital will you acquire to achieve your goals?
Wow.
So we're back to the kids.
Yes.
How would the Trans-Pacific Partnership affect different groups in the United States? Is it more a political situation than an economic one?
Interesting.
How have lower oil prices affected different groups in the United States and outside the United States, Venezuela, Russia? And how has that affected you, and who has been hurt in the United States by these lower oil prices? How can we address the California drought from an economics perspective? How will Brexit affect you? You can ask any question.
Yes.
And it has an economic implication.
Well, and it's compelling kids to look at different points of view, different issues surrounding it, and digging deep. You're not giving a point of view. This isn't a political soundbite from a political ad. You want them, right, to investigate these, and that's the way we start economics lessons in this C3 format.
Yeah, what I want them to do is investigate all sides of the issue.
Exactly. Exactly. Brilliant. And that's what we all want. So in Dimension 2, we ask students to delve into all of the disciplines: history, civics, geography, and economics. Why is it important to include economic study when asking students to respond to these compelling questions? Jim, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, Michelle, I have to say I'm a little bit upset that you would ask that question.
Oh.
The real question is, why wouldn't you include economics? We can take example after example, so we'll take one. Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492. That's what I learned in the 5th grade. That's all I learned. And so if you really want to understand the European maritime explorers, you can't do it without understanding the geography of the trade. You have to understand the strategic position that Spain and Portugal were in terms of seeking a route to the Indies by traveling west. Didn't work out so well, but eventually they got there. So you can't understand Columbus without understanding the geography of the story. You can't do it without understanding the history of the story. You have to understand what the Crusades had to do in getting folks, Europeans, interested in markets to the east. You have to understand the whole story.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think any period or event in history has that dimension you need to include, whether it's Civil War or, immigration or Revolutionary War. There's a great example. If you don't have the economic story woven into it, it's an integral part.
Why were colonists so upset about the legislation that Parliament had passed? Because it put people out of work.
There you go.
People lost their livelihood.
Yeah, it all is intertwined. Now, Dimension 3 talks about gathering sources, looking at different points of view. That's a good strategy in social studies, and I understand there's a number of tools and resources to allow young people to do that. Now, when it comes to economics understanding, can you highlight a few for us?
I'd kind of like to turn this particular source over to Brian because he's an expert in the use of the Federal Reserve economic data. Brian, can you tell us a little bit about how you use that?
Sure. Well, the Federal Reserve Economic Data is an acronym for FRED, excuse me, is the acronym for it, and it's data on the major economic indicators. And when students get to macroeconomics and when they're studying, the role that prices and unemployment and economic growth play in our world, it can be abstract initially. They're learning these new vocabulary and these various terms. But here's the economic data really brings it to life in a way that they can explore. And the way the Federal Reserve has set it up, it is on a platform, web-based platform that's very easy to navigate for you and I, for anybody can go to this site. That there's hundreds of thousands of data series. You can call up anyone that you want. Then you can sort of change the window and the screen. And you can sort of follow trends. So you could see what the unemployment rate has done in the last few months or years. You can change that screen quickly, and you can get a sense of where it is now, but then look at a historical picture, in just a moment's notice. And so I think those kinds of things allow students to sink their teeth into it more, and they have to do it. They're the ones, and they're better at computers than I am. If I ever want to find something out, I just ask them. But in terms of leading them to this new way of understanding how the world works, this is a great tool for them.
Great, terrific. Yeah, I'm sure they get right into it. So in Dimension 4, we'll call quickly, it's about applying what they've learned in the real world to take informed action. And there's a number of implications, obviously, for utilizing economic principles. So, Jim, we know in Dimension 4 it's about applying what they've learned in the real world. Great implications for economics. Give us some examples on how you would recommend teachers use that.
Well, I'll give you one. Open trade. Should we in fact work on agreements to open trade? For example, NAFTA. Is NAFTA good for America or not? The Pan-Pacific Partnership. Should we be for that or not? And as a voter, I need to understand how that affects me and how it affects different groups. Most of these trade partnerships are excellent for highly skilled workers. We sell products abroad that we wouldn't have sold abroad if we didn't have this partnership. But many of the jobs that are going to be lost are the jobs of low-skilled, poor people. Mm-hmm. So there are distribution effects. It's great for consumers. We get a greater variety of products at lower costs. Mm-hmm. That's a good thing. Mm-hmm. But the people who are affected by this directly, need to understand that. And so if we blanketly say, well, we shouldn't vote for it because we lose American jobs, that's just not a good
Too
statement.
simplistic a
Exactly.
response.
Students need to understand the implications. And so with C-Free, we're going to ask them to get different data to support different perspectives.
So Jim, you've got a great technique for teaching this cost-benefit concept to young people with this apron. Show us a little bit how it works.
Michelle, this is just one example of so many examples of simplifying economic concepts that people think are well above their heads, and they're not. So this is the decision-making apron, and it goes through the steps of benefit cost analysis. So we're going to use an example from the Twilight series.
Okay.
So this is Bella, who's a young girl growing up. Well, she's in Washington, the state of Washington now. She's in high school, and she's an incredible bundle of human capital. She is so capable of so many things. And she's decided that she wants to be an outstanding adult, and she wants a partner to share that journey with her.
So where does she go?
She goes in the
Right
goal.
here. All right. And what are
Pocket.
her options here?
Well, first of all, we have to figure out what resource she's going to use to achieve that goal.
Okay.
And the resource is her incredible human capital. And the reason for that is students need to focus on themselves as the major driver of their future. So she's narrowed it down to two alternatives. Number one is Edward. Edward is rich. He has a great family. His family loves Bella, and this would be a great match. But he does have some disadvantages. He's a vampire.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that kind of gets in the way. And so while he has all these advantages, he also glows when he walks around in daylight. This idea that vampires can't get, they can, but they twinkle.
It could be tough.
Yeah, that's sort of distracting. So this is Jacob. Jacob has known Bella all his life. She sort of thinks of him as a little brother. He's madly in love with her. And so he has plenty of advantages. They share common interests. Their families know each other. It's all good. But he has a slight disadvantage. He's a werewolf.
He's a what?
Werewolf.
Oh, a werewolf.
Well,
Okay.
technically he's a shapeshifter.
Oh.
But he ends up being a werewolf. All
Oh.
right. And so he has plenty of advantages, some disadvantages, but the main one is, remember he's in Washington, it rains a lot.
Oh.
When he's a wolf, he really smells bad. So there's some serious disadvantages here, right?
Yeah.
So what we've done is we've identified the goal and the resources, we've identified the alternatives, and we've discussed the advantages and the disadvantages. Now, we have to make a choice. In every middle school classroom that I've ever talked to, they choose Jacob.
Really?
Yeah, that's not the way it works out in the book. Not spoiling anything, but they choose Jacob. So Jacob is the choice. In the decision, she chose Jacob. The question is, what did that choice cost her? It cost her Edward. And so the cost of the choice is not $7.32. It's the best alternative you didn't select. This can be applied to absolutely everything.
Sure.
If we want to discuss peace in the Middle East, if we want to if we want to discuss whether you should drop out of school or not, if we want to discuss what Caesar should have done in crossing or not crossing the Rubicon with his army, we can apply it to absolutely everything. Political issues, historical issues, that's it.
So, Brian, you use this with high school kids, is that right?
I do.
This apron and all that, how do they react to it? What do they think of this
Well,
approach?
certainly the first time you put it on, it gets them smiling, it gets them laughing, and,
Sure.
and everything I found is, when you can get them to do that, they really appreciate it.
They really get into it, I'm sure.
They do, and you can have discussions that turn into heated arguments about like what the characters should do or what they should pick when they're first like learning and applying this as a thinking skill, right? But then as Jim is pointing out, like you can turn it into all kinds of decision making, and sort of use that as a mental framework now for thinking about like if someone's going to drop out of school.
Yeah.
The opportunity cost there of like millions of dollars of lifetime of earnings. And framing it in that way, I think you can send a powerful message, no matter what choice that we're thinking about.
So in this context of preparing kids for college, career, and civic life, we know the older young people get, the more decisions they're going to be making for themselves. So I can just see if they can have that apron framework in front of them.
Yeah, and visuals,
Visuals are helpful.
Not only helpful, I think they help students remember things going into the future, certainly for exams. They tell me just thinking about pictures, really helps them remember things. And,
Yeah. So one of the really great things I love about the way you teach is you take this whole lesson to the next level. And your students, high school boys, visit elementary schools. And tell us what you do with that. What's that about?
Well, the question there that we're asking is what skills do I need to achieve the goals of my future? And so just that framing question, I've asked my students to go and teach that to elementary kids.
And how old are these kids?
We've done the lessons anywhere from preschool all the way up till 8th grade.
Gosh. So you're teaching these very complex concepts to preschool kids, elementary age kids.
Well, we tailor it to whatever age group there is. And as Jim is pointing out, many of the fundamental concepts, I think in the press and the media get shrouded in like complication. But like at the heart of the matter is benefit cost analysis. And making good choices to achieve our goals.
And how do they do this with the young kids? How do your students do that?
Well, when we introduce
the
benefit,
apron?
we use the apron for the really young kids, and it works in every age group.
And they get it.
And they get it, and they love it. It turns the discussion very lively.
Interesting.
And very importantly, my students, the high school kids, they really love that they're being engaged by the kids.
So they're the teacher.
They're the teacher. They're the teacher.
But they kind of break the ice by reading a children's book to them.
Oh.
And then drawing benefit cost analysis from that children's book.
So what kind of children's literature do you use to set something up?
Well, we pick any story. Really, I ask my students to pick a story for the students that they're going to be with. And we try to find a story where there's like maybe an important decision that one of the characters makes, or in some of the books, like pointing out various characters' skills and knowledge, their human capital. But all children's stories, and so the elementary kids, they love getting read to. I have children of my own, and they love book time. So they're glued initially, and then my students, the teachers, pivot and show them the economics that's in there, shows them the choices that the characters are making, and the opportunity costs of those choices. So it turns it, and then of course the experience that it's shrouded in is I think really neat. It's neat for my kids. It's neat for them because they get engaged. They hear a different voice than their teacher, and something memorable is the hope.
So I love this on so many levels. I love that you're integrating literature in children's books, and that you're engaging them in literacy and asking high-level questions of the little ones. Right? They're asking cost-benefit questions, alternatives. What do you gain? What do you lose?
Opportunity
costs. And it just proves what you keep saying, have said all along, Jim, all the years I've known you and your work is young kids can and should understand these issues, which seem very complex on the surface, but they're getting it, aren't they?
Absolutely. I think their engagement in the lessons, and when my students come back for additional lessons, that they're very excited to see my students, and I think they remember. They always start with something that draws back from previous lesson. The students always remember the vocabulary and the terms. They remember my students, and I think with all teaching and learning, and when you connect it to experiences, when you connect it to something memorable, when you connect it to things in their lives, it sticks more.
Can you recall any of the types of questions or choices that the young kids gravitate to when they're going through this exercise?
Well, I mean, there's choices and the skills that my students have to turn the attention towards. They're going to be getting in front of elementary kids, and for many of them, they might be very bright, very talented students, but getting up and speaking in front of a group of students is something they hadn't even imagined themselves being able to do.
For your students?
For my students.
Yes.
And so that's an important skill.
Yeah.
And the decisions of preparation for that, I had one student I remember telling me, just how scared and nervous he was before.
In front of the little ones.
In front of the little ones, of course.
Yep.
There's the little, but he was terrified. But afterwards, a long time afterwards, actually, he told me just how much he appreciated having to be able to do that. And it kind of forced him out of his own shell and to learn a new skill for himself.
Well, I know when I first went into teaching, to get in front of any group and have to discuss or teach something, I became an expert in that area. So do you see that resonating with your students when they come back? Does it further ingrain the concepts for them when they have to teach it to others?
I think so, and certainly from my own experience of being a teacher, the more times you teach something, the more it becomes part of your own DNA.
Yeah.
And so for them having to do it, I hope it's memorable for my own students. When they've gone out and taught benefit cost analysis, and that's something that they'll hopefully use their whole lives.
I could see them at the dinner table at home teaching their own family members, right?
They do.
I'm sure they do. That's awesome. So Dimension 4, it's taking informed action. That's what your students are doing. They're informing another whole generation on this and getting them ready to go up the ladder, getting ready for college, career, and civic life.
Yeah, the civic part is definitely neat, and they feel, I think, not only an ownership but proud of the fact that they can go out and be part of something that hopefully benefits
Yeah,
communities.
and Brian has told me that it's a discovery for a lot of your students. They've driven by this school for years and never had any idea what was going on inside that school and who was there.
Marvelous. So there's a number of resources available to teachers, great ideas like this apron technique, I love it, to support the teaching of economics in very powerful ways. Here's just a few. Take a look at some of these. Go to these websites. I think you'll find some great ideas. And wow, look what we just got today from talking to Brian and Jim. Wonderful. So I want to thank you both again for coming. Jim, you've been such a leader in this work with the C3 and all the other things you've done in California and across the nation. Thanks for being here and sharing all your great expertise with us.
Well, Michelle, thanks so much. It's been a pleasure.
And Brian, thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule for being here and telling us what it's like in the trenches and for just sharing the great work you're doing with your high school students and preparing that next generation by going into the elementary schools.
Well, thanks so much, Michelle. This really was a lot of fun being here.
Of course, I got to thank this wonderful tech crew here at LACOE, led by Tyler Cook, and of course my own Division of Curriculum and Instructional Services, led by Yvonne Contreras. Got to thank them all for their wonderful support and leadership. And so to close, we quote retired Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, "Knowledge of our system of government and rights and responsibilities as citizens is not passed down through the gene pool. It must be taught. The college career and civic life framework will help each state improve civic learning for all students." We hope this broadcast was helpful to you. We thank you and continue to do and support the great work you're doing to prepare all young people for college, career, and civic life. Thank you.